think we are ready to go. I'll start off. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the second Marin County Council of Mayors and Council Members Economic Recovery Symposium. Today's symposium is the cannibalization of brick and mortar by online e-commerce giants. My name is Brian Colbert, and I'm currently the mayor of the beautiful hamlet of San Anselmo. Mayor Kate Collin of San Rafael has another engagement at this time, and I'd like to recognize her support in making today's symposium a reality. Thanks to everyone for attending and making time to participate. We recognize that attendance at these type of events is much more challenging as life begins to move in a more normal rhythm than compared to our first symposium last spring. I'd also like to acknowledge and thank the energy of the steering committee, Shinji Shamuji, who will be moderating our panel, Rebecca Bugas, member of the San Anselmo Economic Development Committee. I'd also like to particularly recognize the efforts of Kelly Warner, vice chair of the San Anselmo Economic Development Committee. The pandemic has and continues to take a toll on many people, businesses, and institutions around the world and here in Marin County. Economic vitality has been obviously negatively impacted since the onset of the pandemic. Yet the seeds of economic recovery are present. Many entrepreneurs and businesses have taken advantage or adapted to opportunities presented by COVID. Make no mistake, an overall recovery, while uneven, is well underway. The Marin Economic Forum, in partnership with the county, is in the process of developing an economic strategy that helps manage COVID aspects and also charts a course for a brighter future. Now is an excellent time for the second symposium, which focuses on a key aspect of our Marin economy, local retail. Our local retail serves as a complement to our restaurant, agricultural, and service sectors, and plays a key role in meeting the needs of the local community and tourists and visitors alike, while providing a unique sense of place for our cities and towns. Today's panelists will address the relationship between e-commerce and local retail, including opportunities and challenges. Time permitting, they'll also touch upon the relationship between parklets and local retail, which are seen by some as primarily benefiting restaurants to the detriment of local retailers. Each panelist will provide introductory remarks, followed by a Q&A, and then audience questions submitted by them. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce and thank our three panelists for participating in today's symposium. First up, we've got Ann Potmeyer-Rahosi. I hope I pronounced that properly. Ann is currently the Chief Human and Resource and Transformation Officer for Gibson Brands in Nashville, Tennessee. Prior to joining the Gibson team, Ann served as the Executive Vice President and President Americas at Levi Strauss, and multiple director-level roles in the Americas, Europe, while at Nike. Ann presently holds advisory board positions at Brooks Sports and at the global tech firm Volumental, where her insights and operational strategies continue to help brands strategically expand in international markets, implement development strategies, as well as achieve balance within omni-channels. She and her husband have raised their three boys here in San Anselmo, which I have to say is near and dear to my heart for the last 11 years, and has strong ties to the San Anselmo community. Welcome, Ann. We also have joining us this morning, David Poku. David is the founder CEO of Illumicart, a Bay Area startup focused on creating an e-commerce driven ecosystem where local retail thrives. He comes from Ghana and is a graduate of Carnegie Mellon University. He has worked as a consultant for many big names in tech, including IBM and Uber. Dave's goal is to bridge the digital divide between e-commerce and local retail, thus giving locals the tech to easily shop locally and local retailers a complementary platform to which to conduct a modern business. He is an avid tennis player and runner. Finally, we got Ken Hira. And I have to say, I heard Ken speak about 3 years ago at a League of California Commerce City conference, and I was just simply blown away by his presence. So I'm so glad that we've kept in touch, and thanks for joining us. Ken is the president for Cosmos Companies. He's an expert in real estate and economic development. He brings over 30 years of varied experience in virtually every aspect of acquisition, entitlement, development, financing, asset management, and strategic plans. His strengths include a keen understanding of retail trends, business, retention, attraction, negotiating, and the like. So with that, we're going to start off with you, Ann.
Thank you so much, Mayor Colbert. And by the way, thanks for inviting me to participate in the symposium. Of course, as a long-term resident of Marin and San Anselmo, I so embrace the need for vibrancy of our economy and definitely in support of our business owners. Doing business in today's environment is no less than challenging, as we all have learned firsthand. But with thinking out of the box and innovation, I truly believe that there can be success. So just to set some context on some of the current numbers that are out there, the National Retail Federation has predicted that the upcoming holiday sales are forecasted to grow between 8.5% and 10.5% year on year, which is the highest on record. It's about $860 billion. E-commerce is targeted at 24% of that, or at $207 billion. And this is seminal in that it's the first time that this has crossed the $200 billion mark. And I share these numbers just to show the trend that we are all a part of. In sharp contrast to that, though, is the supply chain headwinds that everyone's facing and hearing about in the news. Port congestions, labor shortages, factory shutdowns that experts are predicting are going to last fully into 2023. If you look at online current messaging out of stock, it's up 172% compared to the pre-pandemic levels. 6 to 10 retailers out there are saying that they aren't receiving orders in time for the holidays, and it will be a season marked with empty shelves and fewer retail offering discounts for both brick and mortar and e-com sites. 75% of customers out there and consumers are concerned with stockouts as they move into the holiday shopping time. So if you look at these numbers conflicted with each other. The highest sales with the greatest stock challenges. The good news is that the consumer spending out there is to be had. Yes, 37% of online consumers say they intend to buy from Amazon. And actually another 32% of those consumers say that they're going to buy from a branded store. But the devil is in the details. I believe that brick and mortar and e-com is not a zero-sum game, or at least it doesn't have to be. Online is about the convenience in most cases, broadly, and offline is about the experience. Store and business owners can make it personal in a way that online businesses cannot, with immediate gratification, customer loyalty through an interaction, a smile, a conversation, which I love when I go into our local shops, and a more in-depth dialogue on what I need or what the consumer needs. But those retailers that will win most are those that can combine channels of distribution. Most consumers are channel agnostic, meaning that they want to access their product when, where, and how they went 24/7. So I believe it's essential for small business owners to have an online presence to play into the future. Approximately 80% of new consumers are said out there will find you online, whether that's social media, a search engine, an online marketplace like Etsy. And I know many of you are out there currently in Marin are doing this well. It also gives you an opportunity to really drive your business into the future on how you can learn your audience and customers better and where they hang out online and how you can drive them into your stores. Online can provide bits of information to help you target your business, whether it's a new customer base based on who's in your store or who's on your site, from new product ideas and assortments to expand or change or adjust from your search engine, or again, people coming into your stores, or even how to find you via your website or social engagement. It's all integrated marketing, which is going to provide a seamless consumer experience from every channel and every interaction. People may shop in one channel and purchase in another. That's all about their ultimate choice. So how are you creating that choice for your stores? There are also ideas on how to curate your assortment and work with vendors to ensure that there are any possible segmentation strategies from the assortment that you have in your stores to what you might find on Amazon or other online retailers. Local folks want community small businesses to succeed. And so do big brands, by the way. So it's not just the big brands that want the big box. They need smaller community businesses to connect with their consumers in ways that others cannot, and they need them to be just as successful. That opens up then the discussion on the environment, which Mayor Colbert already brought up, and what makes it easy to get into your store and where they choose to engage: traffic, parking, store hours, zoning. And I'm sure we all have some thoughts here, but I'll finish it up and turn it back over to Mayor Colbert and look forward to some more discussion. Thank you.
And that was great. Thank you so much. David, let's turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you, Mayor. And way to go, Anne. Very very crisp in your delivery. So good morning, everyone. The popularity of e-commerce among consumers has soared over the last couple of years, especially in 2020 when COVID was at its peak. This phenomenon did not just happen overnight. Retail in general was able to maintain its standing in the face of the pandemic largely because of e-commerce. So it is indisputable that COVID has accelerated the movement towards online shopping in line with the perspective of brick and mortar retailers. E-commerce is currently 20% of retail in the US. In 2011, e-commerce was just 7% of retail. In 2015, e-commerce was 11% of retail. And by 2020, it had jumped to 20%. By comparison, e-commerce growth more than doubled in the same 5-year span from 2011 to 2015 versus 2016 to 2020. I believe this is an issue before, this was an issue before COVID, and now it's front and center in many discussions because e-commerce has been making inroads into brick and mortar territory for the last 10 years. Retail has been growing, but has not kept pace with e-commerce. That is why the statistics I talked about earlier is relevant. But I believe this is a problem for entrepreneurs to solve by and large. So what are the key barriers that retailers are facing from their perspective? And I don't think retailers are facing any key barriers, but they need an online strategy in tandem with an offline brick and mortar presence. And you can join an online marketplace which is vested, which already has a vested interest. To be super successful, you have to join a neutral provider for an online presence. According to Amazon's founder, consumers want 3 things: faster delivery, great customer service, and value for merchandise. Amazon has worked hard to optimize for these 3 things, and consumers like it. How are you going to tell me a 5-day delivery when your store is 10 to 20 mile radius from my house? That is the problem. Projecting the trajectory of loss over the last 3 to 5 years, what it means for tax and revenue, for tax revenue and jobs. On a state level, it might not look so bad because apparently online companies charge sales tax based on the state, but locally, the implications might be far-reaching. Employment opportunities that could go elsewhere, loss of tax revenue, and real estate implications. So why do small businesses feel that the growth of parklets and cold streets was a net gain for restaurants and a net loss for them? My thoughts on this is that I don't necessarily buy that. Local or small businesses generally depend on foot traffic so they should rather boost their businesses. Restaurants seem to have benefited because of the DoorDashes and the Uber Eats, but where is the DoorDash or Uber Eats for small businesses? And is the future of downtown retail leveraging the traffic driven by restaurants? I would say I don't believe so either. I believe people don't go to eat to shop, they rather go to shop and then eat. So it's the other way around. What are the important takeaways? For businesses, I think they should partner and support. For what are the important takeaways and what strategy and tactics can council members and staff employ at the city and town level to encourage economic vitality of all businesses? Partner and support startups that have local focused business plans. Encourage businesses to stay local by offering incentives. That said, you want businesses to focus on the local markets, not take their businesses online where they spread out to other places. And what strategies and tactics can local retailers employ? Local retailers need an online-offline game. Local retailers need to take competition seriously, and it's not all about competition, so that they are more supportive of each other and complementary rather than just competitive to each other. Their main online competitor is huge and vested, and they cannot afford to boost them by joining their marketplaces. They need to rather seek and partner with entities which have no vested interest, but their success in serving locals and visitors alike. Customers are proactive when buying online, whereas they are passive or reactive in store. And I like to see business owners find ways to make customers more proactive or less reactive in buying in store. And that's why you need a web strategy to reach out to these customers. So with that said, I'll turn it back to Mayor.
That's work.
Yeah.
Thank you for your comments, David. Appreciate it very much. Ken, you're up next.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mayor, and thanks for having me on. It's really a pleasure. If you would indulge me, I have some PowerPoint slides I'd like to share, and
Oh yeah, no, please do. We'd love to see
okay,
that.
great. I may not be as succinct and cogent as Ann and David, but the slides look good. So anyways, we like to have a little bit of fun with what we do. So what we've done in this slide presentation is not only give you a big picture of what's happening with respect to retail, but also we've got some very specific metrics for Marin County. So we spent some time on that doing some homework, and I'd like to share that with you all. And I know folks have already asked, are the slides available, and so on and so forth. And I'm sure we can arrange for that because there's a lot of information that I've got in here that I won't be able to cover in great detail. But I appreciated the comment Ann made, the out of the box thinking and the word innovation. Today, it's all about retail innovation, which is really a time of integration and intelligence as a function of a blending of land uses, which I'll talk a lot about, and really the market intelligence that I think David alluded to. And that is the incredible amount of technology and data that we're able to find that's in the marketplace. Next slide, please. And Bobby's going to help me walk through these, okay? So our company is got a consulting practice, Cosmont Companies, a brokerage practice, and a public finance arm. Next slide. And then this is how I've laid this out. Retail evolution, land use revolution, an economic development playbook, and a real quick glimpse to the future. Next slide. So retail then and retail now. I think all of us in this meeting can remember these experiential locations, right? You had an incredible downtown that was back in the 40s and 50s. You had the mall, which was the enclosed mall that got started in the 50s. You had the expanded regional mall. I grew up in one of those two in Lakewood, California, in Southern California. You've got the Power Center, which is definitely not walkable. You've got the Lifestyle Center, which has got fountains going and experiential. And then today, this evolution is into what I call blended use. So I tend not to use the term mixed use. I think it's been overused, and I'm not sure of its success. However, what you see in the picture on the bottom right, which is a project by Rick Caruso in Southern California in Glendale, is really the integration of land uses. It's the blending, it's the combination, it's the mix of residential and retail and experience and entertainment and office, etc. Next slide, please. So the blending of uses has all these uses that can come together, because I think the homogeneous mall is really evolving into not really being a homogeneous mall anymore. Bodies and people and residential can really enhance what should be right-sized when it comes to malls. The department stores have been struggling. You've got some key regional centers, which we'll show you in Marin County, that are doing pretty good, and some not so much. But I can break this down to say retail is a bit about the essentials, the experience, and the entertainment. Next slide. It's about the experience. So we spent time in Sausalito. Our company was hired to do a land economic study, and we did that over 2019 and presented it to the city council in Sausalito in 2020. And I got to tell you, here was to me the essence of it. If Sausalito in downtown, which is one of the most iconic places in the world, was facing challenges or vacancies, or there needed to be an understanding of what the districts were experiencing and where the consumer wanted to go and what the consumer needed to experience and what the businesses were going through, they weren't alone. Because I'll show you another picture of the iconic locations that we analyzed in 2019 and 2020, including Santa Barbara and St. Helena, and again, Sausalito. So here, if you look at these pictures, it should tell you something about what the consumer is looking for. And that is, it's about the experience. Look at the Ferry Building, which is in San Francisco. Look at Village at Corte Madera, and look at Watershed in Mill Valley. These are outdoor, outside driven public spaces. And I think, David, I appreciated your comments about parklets, because to me, it's like the public space and the outdoor space is almost today's anchor tenant. Next slide. So the new vocabulary of innovation, right? Reindustrial is a little phrase that we coined. It's kind of the combination of retail and industrial, as retail is trying to fulfill the consumer's interests, the doorstep economy, the curbside pickup economy, the fulfillment economy that we're in. And really, retail and industrial are actually blending together. And there's lots of other terms here. Obviously, mall reimagination, buy online, pick up in store, frictionless retail, et cetera. Next slide. So the land use revolution, let's keep going. Everything is changing. I think for one of the first times I can think of, there's been a shift in all asset classes, and maybe they've all been evolving over time, but today, like no time other, hotels are resetting as a function of COVID, retail is reimagining prior to COVID and catalyzed by COVID. The office is being reconfigured as we're all sitting in our homes working. Residential is in a renaissance, and industrial is in the redistribution game. Next slide. So here is Marin County. This is the market intelligence that I referred to. Home prices up 25% from 2019 to 2021. Industrial rents up 7%, apartment rents up 5%, retail rents basically flat, office rents down, which is pretty consistent with what I just mentioned earlier, where everything's changing, because the hotel guys who are down 14%, that's average daily rates, are trying to really come back. And they're challenged, but they are coming back. By the way, the leisure and luxury markets for hotel are really the ones that are leading the charge. The good news about Marin County, I think it's a highly attractive, highly valued, highly desirable destination for the leisure traveler. Therefore, I would argue that the hotel business can make a comeback. You know, the business traveler, I think, is really changed their patterns. And I think business hotels are going to face a longer challenge before they can find their way, so to speak. Next slide. So here's the foot traffic for these different categories. The grocery guys are doing pretty good. The superstores, the Targets and the Costcos are doing real good. Dining is trying to come back. Fitness. How many folks have a gym now set up in their garage, and they're a little worried about going to that gym that's an enclosed gym in the indoors? Well, how about outdoor gyms? How about gyms, personal gyms? How about, you know, different activities that can achieve still fitness? I walk every day, and I've got a gym in my garage now. So we're changing our patterns when it comes to that. Leisure is still struggling, as we just talked about. That's probably also entertainment. You know, are we going to movie theaters? Are we not? Are we watching Netflix more so? And the hotel casino business is about 80% of where it used to be. Next slide. And this is all Marin County, by the way. The data is specific to your county. Here's some shopping centers. Village of Corte Madera is basically back to sea level, back to where it was before in 2019. Village Oaks Shopping Center, which is in Novato, back to where it was. Northgate and San Rafael, challenged. So this tells you a few things about where the foot traffic is going and what people are looking for and what these shopping centers have experienced in your county. Next slide. All of this in market intelligence that we're talking about, by the way, is based on artificial intelligence, and we use a platform called Placer AI. so you know. And so this is Placer AI, real-time visitor base. Also, you can think of it as a heat map of where people are coming from to visit Sausalito. We just thought we'd use downtown Sausalito since we had a familiarity with it. You can pick any location to understand where are the folks coming from and what do those visits look like. Now, it's a little bit scary, but these things, these phones of ours, fortunately or unfortunately, tell the marketplace what we do. If you're at one location for 7 minutes, you're considered a visit. And so with visits at 1.78 million in downtown Sausalito, those are total visits, and 1.09 million unique visits, those are different human beings. And the average household income of those visitors at $137,000 and the length of time that they're staying at 135 minutes, there is a lot of market intelligence that can help your communities understand what you're dealing with when it comes to the consumer, the patterns, the traffic. There's far more data that we can pull up by using our platform, including their path of travel, how long it takes, when they travel to and from. And of course, if you look at the additional demographics here, there's the millennial identification, there's the education identification, and there's a total population identification. Again, all geared toward downtown Sausalito specifically as an example. Next slide. So 3 emerging principles, very important. If I had more time, I would love to unpack these, but just hear me out. Housing is not the lost leader. We've all thought that housing has necessarily been a fiscal negative impact, if you will, to communities, or a lost leader, but it's frankly a growth driver. Retail is not just retail anymore, as I alluded to, the blending of industrial and retail and how they're basically becoming one, or how retail relies on residential, frankly, and how retail can benefit from hospitality and office for that matter, means it's not just retail anymore. Industrial is really today part of the local economy. The last mile delivery of trying to get you all goods and services to your doorsteps. Now, Ann made a comment about online being convenient and offline being experiential. I couldn't agree more. So are we going to just sit at our homes and get our goods and not go out? No. The internet was presumably going to take over all of that experiential activity. That's not accurate, but we were getting a lot of commodities, frankly, as needed during COVID when we couldn't go out at our doorsteps, which was beneficial. But now we're all out looking for the experience. The industrial real estate demand as being a deliverer of goods to our doorstep and curbside pickup activities is coming to fruition these days. Next slide. So the home, just quickly, we are not only living in our homes, we're working in our homes, and we're even shopping in our homes. And you can take this a step further and interpolate square footage of office space or even retail space for the activities that's happening under our roof. I have a question for everybody. If you work 50% of the time from your home, where is that job considered to be located? Is it San Francisco where your office is? Is it Manhattan Beach where my office is? I'm pretty much 80% in my home if I'm not on the road at a city council meeting. So the job is really here in Orange County, if you will, as far as me personally. And then, you know, it's the activity that we do within our homes that really make a difference these days, including buying some of those things online. Next slide. Retail, again, needs to be reimagined and blended with other land uses in order for it to be more sustainable on a go-forward basis. Our country has 23.5 square feet per capita of retail, 5 to 10 times more than most other countries around the world. That footprint is too big. Next slide. Industrial is critical to our doorsteps, local job creation, the blending of uses, as I mentioned, of retail and manufacturing, not manufacturing, but the fulfillment and warehousing of goods. It's got a very low vacancy rates and pretty high demand. And you can see that Amazon, if you want to call it the Amazon effect, Amazon is out, frankly, looking for these opportunities to do fulfillment, e-commerce, and delivery. Next slide. And I'll go through this very quickly and then I'll wrap it up. But there's an economic development playbook, and maybe I'll take more questions related to these, but there are tools that can help your communities through these times, and we're using them. There's a value capture proposition that we are using as part of our services with many of the communities we work for, and that is Development Opportunity Reserve. That's getting community benefits out of residential or new densities. STAR, which is the idea of a sales tax in lieu concept that can help many of the sales tax reliant cities negotiate basically through development agreements an in lieu proposition, which we call STAR. Enhanced Infrastructure Financing Districts, which is tax increment financing, and that's for capturing the value of new assessed value that gets created by new development. And we're working with these types of tools across the entire state. Next slide. And so the following slides here are just going to be examples of those. Don't give away zoning is one thing we say when it comes to entitlements and a zoning strategy. You can hang on to that and use that as a tool or a currency. Next slide. And we use that in a central California, Central Coast city of Buellton. It's working effectively as we speak. Next slide. And we've done the STAR in lieu fee as a part of a development agreement negotiation for two industrial projects. Next slide. Tax increment financing. Keep going, Bobby. We've used that where counties, frankly, and cities are partnering together to use their tax increment. Next slide. And these are just some of the locations where we've done these various things: mall reimagination, destination downtowns, tax increment financing, creating districts, including downtown districts, and all the places, some of the places I mentioned earlier. Again, Napa, Capitola, Solvang, Sausalito, Brentwood, Santa Barbara, Santa Monica, St. Helena, and the list goes on. Next slide. So look to the future, and I'll wrap up. Clearly available for questions. So we see it as 3 E's, right? The first step is to get educated. And part of the comment I made on market intelligence is we need to be educated about the marketplace. There's such incredible data available today, artificial intelligence, real-time information, where people are coming and going. You can use past census information or certain past sales tax information, but there's an educational component that's live and real, and we use that platform in order to get educated about the communities we do work in. And then I think what's important is to get engaged with that community. So you educate yourselves, and then you go out and help educate your community to a degree. They also help educate you through their engagement. So it's get the community's input, stakeholders, communities, et cetera. And only then, I think, can we all figure out what is the right thing to entitle or re-entitle. Let's face it, with the land use revolution, we are in the re-entitlement business because land use is evolving so much that we need to think about our zoning codes. We need to think about our general plans, our specific plans. We need to take a look at, well, what's the zoning mean? What is industrial today? What is retail? What is residential? And how can that be permitted or entitled? Or how do we need to rethink some of that, again, by being out of the box and being innovative, even in our planning efforts? So I say a lot of times, you'll hear me say we're in the education business. We're also in the entitlement business or re-entitlement business. And I'll close with a quote from someone who's clearly much smarter than I am, and that is Albert Einstein, who I love. But you can't solve a problem with the same thought process that was part of creating the problem in the first place. Thank you.
Ken, thank you so much for your remarks. Thanks for the deck. Shinji, we're going to turn it over to you now for a moderated discussion.
All right, thank you, everybody. Thanks for your opening comments. I'm going to just structure this, and just for the sake of the attendees here, what we'll do is we'll dedicate about 20 minutes or so to a panel discussion. I'm going to just seed this with 4 high-level questions, and then we'll follow that up with a Q&A session, so questions from the public. And as we go through this panel, feel free to throw your question into the chat so that you keep a pin in it, you don't forget it. And then we'll get back to as many questions as we can once we wrap up the panel discussion. So going back to the panel discussion, again, thank you for your initial comments. 4 questions to kind of go here. And I guess what we'll do is I'll just ask the question, and feel free to speak up, as you kind of see fit. I won't, call on you. You guys can kind of keep this more of like an organic discussion here. So for the first question, thinking about brick and mortar in Marin County specifically, to what degree does a mismatch between what local buyers, and again, we're seeing sort of demographic shifts, especially with COVID. So is there a mismatch between what this sort of new wave of local buyers are actually buying and sort of where they prefer to shop for certain things and what local retailers are selling? And to what degree does that potential mismatch possibly drive some of this e-commerce cannibalization?
Well, maybe I'll start. You have some traditional retail, right? You've got mall type properties that we highlighted in some of the metrics that we showed, and they're going to need to evolve, and they're going to need to adjust to the consumer who during COVID, I think realistically, had to have done a clear amount of online shopping. Now the grocery stores did pretty good during COVID, frankly, because we needed to go out. That's the essential comment that I made earlier. We needed to go out and get our essentials. The Costco's, the Targets, the grocers did pretty good because we were pretty focused on the basic needs of everyday living and surviving, and maybe hoarding, unfortunately, the paper towels and everything else that we did, and the basic food items. And so they benefited from that. The mall folks, obviously, the more they're enclosed, I think end up being challenged. The more department store formats that are in the county, they end up being challenged. And that's because not just of COVID, okay? It's because they were evolving before COVID hit. And so that evolution was inevitable. And that's why I made the comment about the outdoors and turning centers from the inside out. That's part of what I think can be a go forward success, because people are looking for more of those outdoor opportunities, including restaurants, right? So how many restaurants in Marin County, I don't know the answer to this, created an outdoor patio environment? I know in Southern California, there was one particular restaurant, and they took over the parking spaces in front of their store. So should the city in that case go and hit them with a permit violation, or should the shopping center CC&Rs hit them with a parking violation? What was the right thing to do during that period of time? It was not to do those things, but to be more flexible. Well, guess what? That patio is now permanent for that restaurant. So we're all trying to find that outdoor space. So I think that evolution actually is a positive one during COVID. I think you'll see centers continue to turn from the inside out. And I think that's going to affect a lot of your regional retail. Notwithstanding my comments about how residential should be introduced to many of the projects, because you've got a giant footprint that I think ends up being too much, again, because of the activities we can do online. So Shinji, I'm not sure if that answered very specifically, but that was just my thought process in addressing your question.
I'm also thinking, oh, go ahead, Ann. Go ahead.
No, go ahead, Shinji, go ahead.
So I think that makes sense. I think what I was getting at was more about, so I think you touched upon it at the beginning of your question, where you talked about sort of what buying patterns were sort of continued that were in person versus ones that kind of shifted online. But what I'm thinking about is, so for example, Marin County has, I believe, if not one of the oldest average head of households in the entire state. But we're also seeing from the pandemic is demographic shifts. So, families like myself, we have 2 young children under 4. There's a lot of that's sort of also happening. And so I'm just wondering, for example, a lot of the retail that we see, for example, in downtown San Rafael, is decidedly not targeted towards younger families. It's decidedly targeted towards an older demographic who may not necessarily have as much disposable income or spend as much. And so I'm wondering, to what degree do you see that mismatch between sort of the demographics of the buyers that are coming in and who actually have disposable income versus the kinds of things that the current incumbent brick and mortar retailers are selling? So hopefully that clarifies the question a little bit.
Yeah. And go ahead if you want to address it.
Yeah, I mean, I would say just from looking at it, to your point, I mean, there's only when you look at the change, the demographics to me changed a lot faster just because of the pandemic. And it was I've never seen a demographic, so many strollers and golden retrievers show up in Marin as quickly as it did. And it was super encouraging, right? Because it just brought a vibrancy to the area. And to your point, I think that the establishment of what currently is out there in brick and mortar is to a more influential and more, maybe, I don't want to say sedate but more not as energy driven maybe as younger families that are coming in. And so their need for entertainment, for fast in, for living a lifestyle that is more constrained because it has to be more structured when you're in the beginning part of your life versus your end of your life, you have a different need for your experience in your brick and mortar. And that's why I look at that. I think the parklets were amazing because it did allow people to actually experience and get out, and the vibrancy that you saw was real. But it hasn't enabled, the time frame hasn't enabled that to make that shift into the brick and mortar environment. Well, one, because people, you've got leases, you've got people, you can't just turn you could turn some parklets, you could turn your menus, you could turn your experience from an eating perspective faster than you can a brick and mortar for a lot of different reasons. And so I think that shift is going to take longer. And I also think that there needs to be a full path planning when you look at, to get into the zoning, of what stores do you have in there and what stores do you have in your downtown area from an adjacency perspective. If it's a lot of not as much vibrancy, if somebody's going to an area to do a store and they've got a younger family, you want to be efficient and you want to kind of go out there. If you're buying birthday party things or if you're buying, staples, you want to make sure that your adjacencies are such that you can be very efficient. If you've got that, like you've got to put everything in the car, drive, put everything in the car, drive, it makes it very difficult. So I think that the evolution of full path has got to be a zoning discussion. It's got to be a planning discussion. And then there's a time continuum that's attached to that.
To add to that, I'll just use an example of my personal example of visiting a restaurant recently with a bunch of friends. We just entered the restaurant. They got us seated quickly, and then everyone was sitting. We're waiting for the waiter or waitress to show up, and nothing showed up. So we're like, what's happening? Apparently there was a tablet in the middle of the table and it had a QR code on it. And all you had to do was just scan the QR code. Each of the participants on the table, scan the QR code. And then you could order under your name. So that means the bill is divided right there and then. You don't have to wait for bills to be divided. You got whatever you wanted, going straight to the kitchen. And so people are interested in using new technology. They want to enjoy using their phones. They want to enjoy using what is available to them without being interrupted as to how quickly they have to make a decision or being forced to make a decision take your phone and make a decision versus a waitress is standing there waiting to take your order. You're under pressure. So people are taking these little new things, ability to order online in their own comfort, in the comfort of their homes versus, putting on a shirt, pants, whatever, and sitting in the car, driving to the store to make a purchase. All of that seems to be affecting their convenience. And so people are opting more for convenience. And COVID made it even more more of a no-brainer, because you don't have to think of math, you don't have to think of anything. All you have to do is just order, and then you pick it up at your door. And you know that the person that is bringing it up to you is usually safe or it's going to be contactless. So all these have added to more people buying online, and it looks like there's a newer set of consumers rising up versus an old set of consumers. It's just technology has changed a lot of things, and it's making online purchasing easier versus brick and mortar.
So, hey, Shinji, just add to that, and I'm sorry if I didn't quite address your question
No worries.
on the demographic shift, but we experienced that, frankly, in our work in Sausalito. We had some of those discussions about new families moving in, let's just say, you know, and the more mature population who's lived there for a long time, having certain patterns. But I think David just hit on the topic of technology and how, you know, DoorDash and promoting on social media and Yelp and all these other platforms are the way I think a more millennial driven population are thinking and acting. And so that's where the connection needs to be between the new consumer in, say, Marin County as younger folks maybe are moving into the communities and the small businesses, right? There needs to be that understanding that this is how we communicate. You kind of communicate and consume and even commute differently based on that younger population base and with maybe a younger family, because we are looking for experience with younger family members, and we also are looking for some entertainment and convenience as well, because we've got our hands full.
No, that makes sense. So thematically, kind of what I'm hearing, and potentially they're conflicting, and maybe they're not, is so on the one hand, there's this desire for greater use of technology. So part of it is just a lot of the new buyers are digital natives. And so that's just sort of maybe the forum in which we're used to engaging, and that's kind of been accelerated by COVID. But at the same time, there's also this desire for experiential broadly. And then as Ann pointed out, it's a very different kind of experience if you are a family with kids and versus if you are sort of an older couple whose kids are adults and maybe you have grandkids or even great grandkids. How do you, the three of you, how do you see those sort of, I see those as potentially conflicting, but how do you see those sort of working together or can be worked together in favor of local retail, particularly as e-commerce is sort of looming over the shoulder, sort of eating up some of that business because of that sort of digital native purchase pattern?
Well, I think it's interesting. You know, I don't think it's an either or. You know, it's like everybody wins when everything rises, right? And everything gets established, so it doesn't go pillar to post in one way or another. You know, there was a question on there is just like, how do you make sure that the balance from a planning and zoning perspective gets to the offering where you can have the right mix of stores, shops, offices, and maybe that's, you know, more to Ken, because I think that's in your wheelhouse as far as how you've seen that evolve. But I do think that, to what I was saying earlier too, I think there's a deliberate pathway of the way that you ultimately, you know, you've got your end state of what that would potentially look like. And then how do you set the parameters to success on who you're actually gaining in there from a tenant, a planning, and then when you look at even the parking, the traffic, everything else that kind of, because those are all different. It's not just the shops and the brick and mortar, but it's even at the transportation, how you access all of it. So there is a large planning zoning component to it that I think has to be done, and then work towards that in the way that you work with your owners, you know, because it's different. It's different when you're dealing with a large mall owner versus a lot of individual owners. And it's messier, but if you create the vision, it's also very exciting. So I know that there's some other dynamics when you talk about Marin, especially when you get into these smaller towns, of people that own the different retail shops that aren't willing to do what it takes to re-image potentially what their stores are from an investment perspective or from whatever. And so that to me has to be almost a zoning planning discussion before you get to what is the execution to actually have these spaces where these people can come in, invest, and commercialize.
Yeah, and I appreciate those comments. I'll just try to leverage off of those. In Santa Barbara, when we did our work on State Street, again, iconic location in the world, and they were suffering from vacancies. So as we evaluated the zoning codes there, and then did stakeholder interviews and discussions, including discussions with the city, to try to bring to light what the real circumstances and what some recommendations are for that downtown, keeping in mind that the zoning process, or permitting process, I should say, in Santa Barbara was really challenging. It took a long time. It was not just expensive, but frankly, it was very unpredictable. How does a small business permit a store or a new store or reimagine a store, which Ann just mentioned, and I totally agree. There's an incumbency on the small business owner's part to adapt, to reinvest. But how do they do that if the process for permitting and zoning is long, arduous, expensive, and unpredictable? It doesn't make it, it isn't easy for those small investors and small businesses. So part of one of our recommendations was to try to streamline that process. And if communities can try to strive for a more business-friendly approach, or another way put, how do I get to yes? And that may not be the mentality of the past, but if communities can think about how do we get to yes, and that doesn't mean you just say yes for the heck of it. You want to shape a project, shape architecture, shape the process for permitting so that you still have a quality outcome. But how do I get to yes? So what we've told a lot of our city clients these days is it's your impetus, it's incumbent upon you to be more flexible because of the land use change. Now let me flip that story for a second. Business owners and investors and landlords have a culpability as well. It is not all the community's fault, if there's vacancies because the market's changed, and business friendliness is a two-way street. Landlords need to be more collaborative. So that's the concept that we've been talking to landlords about. You need to collaborate with your tenants. You need to collaborate with the public sector, which is this idea of public-private partnerships is needed like no time in the past. So private sector and the businesses have to be more adaptable or collaborative in their effort and think about how they're going to reinvest and not just sort of wait for the consumer to show up. They need to be investing in online platforms to gain traction, and they need to reinvest in their storefronts, which is something that we told St. Helena. You need to start to reinvest in your storefronts, and then you need to work with the cities and your tenants, again, in a more collaborative fashion. So those are some experiences we've had. One last thing I'll say is, in our advice to some of the small businesses, I think it was St. Helena, we identified 3 key things for small businesses. 1 is authenticity. 2 is customer service. And 3 is experience. So we said, if you can offer those to the consumer, that's one way that you can continue to be successful. The beauty of Marin County is there's so much authenticity built in to your communities. You have it. It's in the fabric already. And now you need to appeal to that new consumer, Shinji, that you're making comment about, the new consumer who's looking at technology and looking at family lifestyles as a way to conduct business.
And to add to everyone's point, Ken, as he rightly said, businesses need an online presence to gain traction. And as it relates to e-commerce cannibalization of brick and mortar, you take brick and mortar stores today, and they don't have the ability, if they go online right now, they don't have the ability to compete with the likes of Amazon. So the dilemma is, do I join Amazon in the marketplace, or where do I start? Or do I just go in and just have my own online presence? Where do I start? And it's a big dilemma. And so what, in my opinion, should happen is that brick and mortar stores, local, should be more complementary they should find a way to be complementary to each other, so that when someone visits a local market online, they have access to as much inventory, if not more, than, say, an Amazon. Because once all these stores are complementary to each other, there's no limit. They have everything that a customer could want. And then to add to that, you don't tell somebody that my store is 10, 20 miles away from your house and I'm going to take 5 days to deliver something to you. They want it, and you want to give it to them now, and as soon as possible, as quickly as possible. So you leverage that proximity to the customer, and then you try to be complementary, using technology being offered by providers in your city to create a marketplace that addresses the local needs of the people. And I think that's where you start making a good dent in changing how big e-commerce is affecting the general landscape.
You know, what's interesting is that, so all three of you kind of touched on, in some way or other, zoning as kind of being a key component to this. So zoning from the standpoint of, allowing for maybe redevelopment of certain areas, but then I also see zoning as important. I think I recall from Ken's presentation, industrial zones kind of being really important, to address David's point here about this idea of fulfillment, last mile fulfillment, like this inability to compete with e-commerce on this ability to drive rapid delivery. So I guess my question here is, from my position as planning commissioner in San Rafael, I see a lot of the challenges that we have in terms of getting both landlords as well as community members, and specifically homeowners, to the table with regards to permitting and allowing for additional growth, particularly industrial, but as well as some of that additional housing to bring more population, more buyers for some of these stores. I know that this is down to getting to yes, as Ken put it. How do we get to that yes? So the solution seems relatively straightforward in terms of how all three of you described it, but the challenge seems to be, particularly in Marin, I think it appears to me that a lot of people see Marin as kind of a bedroom community. But a lot of the things you're saying kind of call for almost a decentralization of these larger supply chains to enable these local businesses to be able to, provide those experiences, as well as the rapid delivery of products to people within timeframes that are competitive with e-commerce. So how do we kind of address that? Maybe we'll call it psychographic gap.
I'm not sure I'm seeing it the exact same way. I don't think it's necessarily about the supply chain. I think there's ways to service the end consumer in a way by local delivery, by curating what their store is. I don't think to me, it's an industrialized option, solution. And I do get, having lived in Marin, I do get the NIMBY, right? No one wants it in their backyard. And because there is a certain level of preservation that you want for the ambiance, the feeling, the experience, of Marin. So there is that guideline. But I would say that I think, to me, that what I talked about before is using technology and the technology to access and engage with people, but going back to local solutions to enable that, to me, is more of the unlock versus going to an industrial development plan or solution from a supply chain perspective.
Yeah, I think it's a great question, Shinji. If I'll focus maybe a little bit more on the residential opportunity, if you will, or that challenge. I get the idea that Ann is sharing about how do you bring an industrial solution to the land uses that may need and want local deliveries? But from a residential perspective for a moment, I think it starts to a degree with education. As I mentioned earlier, I think the communities need to understand that the stakeholders, the community members need to understand kind of just what is the land use revolution really all about? And how are those fundamental changes? Our communities in California were built on essentially retail, because the general funds of every city, if you look at them, they relied about a quarter on retail sales tax. Some cities relied 50% plus on retail sales tax. The majority of the reliance had been on property tax in the past, but if you had a high sales tax reliant city for their general fund, and now all of a sudden the retail is changing, you say, wow, how do we provide the same services? And then the notion that residential might necessarily be negative, again, from a fiscal impact perspective, which I mentioned earlier, is a notion that needs to be further explored. But the point is that the retail sales tax revenue is not sustainable like it had been in the past. So that educational piece needs to be where we all start. Even a hotel transient occupancy tax, which for a while was sort of trying to be replaced by many communities across California to be a revenue generator, but it's more, it fluctuates a lot more, and it was a much smaller percentage of most of the general funds. So you got to take a step back and look at, well, what does bringing some residential into my marketplace mean? Number one, you're meeting an incredible shortage of housing, which we have across our state, an unbelievable shortage of housing, because that means that pricing of housing with a low supply is completely unaffordable. And in Marin County, it's not affordable. So the question is, are people willing and able to contemplate or consider or be open-minded to the introduction of some of that additional supply in order to help alleviate that issue? So you have an insatiable demand for housing in any shape or form, you know, affordable housing, for rent housing, for sale housing, et cetera. Those bodies can actually help, frankly, the fiscal impact of a community, because they're going to do a little more shopping and have a little more experience and even represent a job necessarily. So it's the open-mindedness, I think, of the community to the fact that the land uses are changing so dramatically and that the future is not going to be what the past has been. So are we open to that idea? Plus, you look at the younger families that you just mentioned who want to live in Marin County, and they're trying to find places to live so they can, because they can't afford to live in other places like, say, San Francisco for that matter. So how do you address that? I think it's getting to the community, and I think it's the educational piece. So last thing I'll say is, if the community says, well, I want something in return to allow for different land uses to be allowed, let's figure out what that is. That's what we did in the city of Buellton. We called it Development Opportunity Reserve, for increase in height, for a reduction in parking, for an increase in density. There was a return that the development community, the private sector, gave to the community. The community agreed upon it through a specific plan. We went and evaluated that and spent a lot of time in workshops with the community and said, what's important to you? And in that case, they wanted to revitalize a downtown that had a giant median on it. And so they said, well, they wanted public restrooms, they wanted public parking, they wanted some trail investment. We figured those things out. The community said, these are important to us. We would consider, again, increasing height, increasing some density to a limit, and maybe relaxing some parking for some of these projects. If you build public parking somewhere else, if you build us a restroom, if you help revitalize our downtown, they agreed to that community benefit package. So that's a tool. And my point about tools to get us from point A to point B, again, starts with the education, and then next is the engagement. We got to go talk to the community about what's important to you all in order to then figure out, hey, this is a path forward. And then again, now we know what we can entitle. Is it a redevelopment play? Is there a density proposition? Is it a blend of uses where residential and retail can coexist on property that isn't at its highest and best use? You know, so there's a lot of specifics when you get into that, and that's a lot of the work that we do with these communities.
With supply chain, last mile delivery is something you cannot afford to mess up, because that's where the customer is directly involved. And a lot of what is happening now is that companies are confused whether they have to go into a marketplace that is not local and try to sell their wares there. And so that sometimes just messes up the entire supply chain, because it tends to move it from from the last mile back into the midst of everything else, where there is chaos. There's chaos again. Last mile starts adding some normalcy to the supply chain. It gives it some streamlining, but taking it back to where shops or stores or brick and mortar owners are going back and putting their wares in marketplaces which are not local, confuses everything again and messes everything up. So I feel that local retailers or local brick mortar operators should focus on the last mile and get it right there. Now that it's so much the focus of business, they focus on the last mile and get it right there, and then everything else comes together, and they can fight big e-commerce or be more competitive with big e-commerce the way they have to be.
That makes sense. So one final question before we go on to our Q&A from the audience is, one of the other major challenges that I see with local retailers is that, Ken made the point about sort of the importance of the housing components with regards to housing affordability. And, as we've seen, oftentimes sort of the typical salary that you'll see, particularly for smaller brick and mortar retailers, is below the level that's really realistically required to live locally. Marin County, even though we do have sort of a really good bus network, overall, it's not necessarily easy to get, especially to a lot of the smaller towns in Marin. It's not necessarily easy to take public transit in and out if you are a retail employee there. So, and as a result, we're seeing a lot of impacted hours due to shortage of staff, right? Which ultimately affects income. And if cities are dependent on sales tax from retail, then again, they're going to see a significant impact on that. So from the standpoint of just sort of like this wage housing cost arbitrage and how that might impact the availability of staff, what are some of the options that local retailers have, particularly with regards to competition from e-commerce, where these companies may have either public investors or VC money that can help subsidize a lot of that staff cost?
David, your turn to go first. I
Can't wait to call me out. Okay, good.
I knew you were ready. I know you have a right idea. I can see it.
So, retailers or brick and mortar operators in general, as I said, have to have a mind of competition where they kind of galvanize themselves locally by being complementary to each other versus against big e-commerce, versus them, going online and then checking out and joining different marketplaces. So that said, that maintains business local. Businesses can thrive locally. That in turn affects real estate. It brings real estate up you get more revenue from real estate. And then it trickles down to the rest of the real estate market in terms of individual housing and the rest.
I'll add a little bit, David, too. I mean, it's interesting, Shiji, what you say. I don't think that any large companies, either whether they're private equity or they're investor backed, are actually subsidizing a lot of these. Maybe they are just kind of keep things afloat till they can get their long-term solution for what they're looking at. The only way to lower your ratio is to increase your productivity, and so if you're looking at your productivity and your model, of course, it's more expensive to do it, keeping your stores, your lights, everything open. So I do go back to the necessity for people to survive this, to really kind of address their channel mix. And is there an opportunity for them to do more of their online business to offset some of their hourly wages and what it's going to take for them to get somebody to actually staff the store? I'd also say it's not Marin centric, right? I've been doing business even the last 6 months, even here in Nashville. Or in Bozeman, Montana, or in Petaluma even. It is so competitive for every single industry out there to find people to come and work. And I mean, you saw In-N-Out Burger offering $20 an hour with benefits and 2 weeks vacation, or part-time workers with full-time benefits. People are getting super creative because there becomes a point where it's diminishing returns. You can't get the people in there. It's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy that you're not going to make your revenue. So, but there's that fine line to push the productivity and find out where you're investing in that and what portion of your model makes the most sense, so you can prime it and hopefully claw back until we're out of this. Which may be a way. We also, is not only just coming in. I think that there's another discussion where you're finding that you have the whole teenage population, which was and even Marin, it was a source of labor, and that is just going away. That we're not getting that same attraction for that employment base to come back into the work in the store. So it's not a one-side solution, but I do think it becomes productivity based on your lowering your ratio.
And I'll just try to add to that simply. I think we've made comments, David made some comments about how important technology is today. And, what does it take for small businesses to necessarily attract labor, but what does it take for those small businesses to be successful? Because who are they catering to, and how can they reach more customers? If Marin and other places are so sort of international and to a degree visitor driven, that's what we talked about. Some of the businesses or some of our research showed for downtown Sausalito. It's definitely what I talked about with some of the St. Helena small businesses. We did a couple of workshops, and I'll give you one example. There was an owner of a chocolate store in St. Helena, and his daughter was in charge of social media. The postings for that store were incredible. And what I mean by that is they were timely, they were consistent. The product, as it changed from season to season, not just every quarter, but almost every month, was promoted through social media. I tracked all the businesses on Instagram in St. Helena, and I watched what some of the businesses did and how they were in the marketplace. Certain jewelers are online and posting in social media every day, every other day. Now, you got to be careful because that might become noise to somebody's in basket. But how can you not use that platform to reach your customers? And then if you look at the followers on the different social media platforms, whatever they are, it doesn't matter to me, whether it's Instagram or Twitter or what have you, you can tell the difference between those that really understood the online platform and how important that was to reach their consumers, and those that didn't devote the time to it. So that's one way for small businesses to basically be 24 hours a day and to have a greater reach to not just the local market. You got to reach both, but you got to reach the local market and the visitor market. And I don't know what better way to do that than the social media platform. Another joke, just real quick, and I'll end, is There's a gentleman who's a developer and he will yell out loud, "Where's my millennial?" Now, that doesn't sound like a very nice comment, but let me tell you what he's saying. He needed help. He needs help. He needed help with, he's a very smart guy, very successful. He needed help with the technology that was needed to do a Zoom meeting, to show a pro forma online, to modify that financial pro forma, to do some marketing, to promote certain opportunities. And it was that younger, more experienced person who was going to bring more value, if you will, to that organization than ever before. So that's how we have to sort of start to think, is also who's our customer. And if you believe the Gen Zs and the millennials of this world are the future consumer, I would agree with you 100%. 80 million strong with $700 billion of buying power. That's a big part of the future for many of the businesses and small businesses.
I would agree with everything that you said, Ken, and I think that and there are people in Marin, I think, that are starting to do this well. I'll call out Longway in San Anselmo. I think she's doing an amazing job, and she's got her store as an artist. She has a very good online presence, a very good social media presence. She's got a PR component to it. She offers coffee. She offers grab and go. She offers local artisans. So she has kind of, in a very small space, extended her reach of access to consumers by keeping local, but using technology and all these other components to target where she should go next. And again, I'm not conversant on exactly what her performance is, but she seems to be doing very well. It's always vibrant, exciting, and how do you take that type of model and extend that further into other areas of businesses that are local, that want to, solve their solution, or a solution to their issues?
Mm-hmm. All right, thanks. I mean, this is really enlightening discussion. I'm going to jump over to the questions now, I think, looking at time. So I'm just going to go down to the chat, and I know it looks like, Anne, you had kind of answered a couple questions, so I'll try to jump around.
Did I jump ahead? I'm so sorry.
No, that's perfect. That's perfect. So I'll avoid that one since it looks like you answered it. But I'll start with from Mike Blakely to David. Can you specifically describe some of the incentives that cities can offer retailers and small businesses?
Yeah, Mike, when you talk about incentives, you're talking about mainly tax breaks that and sometimes organize some educational programs that will help educate the public, and sponsor also sometimes get-togethers in a city square that will bring people to look at the wares that brick and mortar offer. So these are some of the ways that can, but mainly tax incentives in all sorts of ways will be helpful to keep the businesses local.
Awesome, thanks. So next question, this is directed at Ken. How should small towns like San Anselmo look ahead to make sure that parklets are tied into the landscape and benefit both retail shops and restaurants?
Yeah, and I think I tried to also answer this, but let's talk about it. I think there wants to be the embracing of those outdoor areas, and kind of almost try to create those to be synergistic, if you will, with retail and with restaurants. And the city can help themselves by doing that, by creating either walkability or just a synergistic promotion of some of those outdoor areas. Hey, you go buy a meal, you can go sit in the park area, or come visit our park areas, which are outdoor, that get you more comfortable, if you will, in this type of a market. Plus, we have incredible weather, if you will. So, and then, while you're here and you're experiencing our outdoor parklets, if you will, it's kind of like live, work, and invest in our community, or live, work, and play in our community. And you can help promote retailers accordingly. So there ends up being maybe there's a pop-up opportunity, pop-up meaning temporary retail opportunity in one of those parklets, and maybe a new business or a business is featured every month in that parklet, and their wares are displayed or shown, or there's a way to market, again, synergistically with some of the retailers. I think, again, the outdoors is sort of, as I said earlier, it's like today's anchor tenant. If you look at shopping centers, that's what you call them. If you look at these blended use projects, what do they all have in common, new ones today? They have an outdoor park open space. All of them do. It's very important. So your towns can promote those almost like they're one center or one blend of uses, in order to get the small businesses and those parklets and the consumers thinking along those same lines to connect with each other.
Yeah, thanks, Ken. Next question from Lori Berliner. As a San Anselmo retailer, I am concerned about the proliferation of offices and professional services building in the downtown business district. I'm not talking about hair, nail, facial salons, but real estate offices and interior design offices that are not often open on a daily basis. Do the panelists, so this is to all three of you, think that zoning laws should be used in the retail revitalization process? And if so, what criteria and ideas are appropriate to small towns such as San Anselmo?
And you're on mute.
I'm mute, Ann.
Thank you. This is the one I tried to answer. I'm not as conversant on the zoning laws of kind of the specifics of and the processes in Marin. I know it for residential, but I don't know it for the other side of the business. But to me, intuitively, it does make sense to have some kind of balanced retail offering, to the extent that planning and zoning should be involved to create that, and limit non-traffic driving relationship shops tickets, or I'll even go one further, opening and closing hours of the stores that are there. I mean, you've got a lot of stores too that are in there and they're just empty. There's no, even if there's not people going into it, it creates a dim on the street when stores just aren't even, no one's sitting in those offices, right? So they're just, the lights are out and it's dark even on a Saturday or a Sunday. So to the extent it is, I think it makes sense for the zoning and planning to get involved and put some specific parameters. I'm just not sure from a legality standpoint or where we are, if you can get there and how long, but again, that's kind of more, I think, Ken's wheelhouse than maybe my experience.
Yeah, I think that the starting point of these different land uses like office uses and stuff kind of wants to start with the demand. Where is the demand in the marketplace? If real estate offices say, hey, I want to locate in a downtown environment because I have better access to customers, et cetera, that's telling that the market is telling us something about their interest in locating there. If you look around at different downtowns and retail districts for that matter, you will see today such different land uses or uses from before. You'll see urgent cares in shopping centers today. You'll see offices, you'll see cable companies that can locate because they can be closer to the consumer in a better location. Well, what was the alternative to that? And that is, if a space ends up being vacant, it's a kiss of death. So the question is, if the vacancy is a function of the lack of demand of a use, but there is demand from, say, an office use, it's a fine line. You have to evaluate from a zoning perspective what's really allowed. A lot of zoning codes will tell you, hey, office isn't allowed on this ground floor. It has to be retail. Office has to be on the second floor, et cetera. But we need to rethink that to a degree, because if you have vacant retail storefronts on the ground floor, the market is telling us something. Oh gosh, 10,000 square feet, it's vacant, but I've got all this demand for these office uses. And maybe we should rethink that a little bit. And maybe there's the right mix, within your zoning code, the flexibility, flex zoning, if you will, can be important. I'll give you a different example. Sorry to go back to Santa Barbara so much, but Amazon bought or leased a 50,000 square foot Saks Fifth Avenue space on State Street. So that department store, that 50,000 square feet was not going to get refilled by any traditional retailer in the future. They took on that space. Now, is it as active as it was before? No. But is it occupied? And by the way, and it was for a research and development use. Are the Amazon R&D workers benefiting from actually being able to walk out and cruise down State Street and maybe grab lunch or get an experience? Yes. So it's, I think, a better synergy. Along State Street, there were several co-working spaces or offices that were in demand to open, and they had a retail storefront, but they had a co-working space in the back. So it was like a combined use. That's what the market was telling Santa Barbara State Street at the time. And your zoning code, if it just wants to be fully inflexible, you may end up having to suffer through vacancies. If it wants to be a little more open-minded, then we can think about what's the right mix. It doesn't have to be 100%, but it can be some combination thereof to account for the marketplace.
Yeah, to add to Anne and Ken's points, I'm not too conversant with the zoning laws, but what I would think is if retail is not doing too well in a certain area and the area is not zoned off just for retail, then it becomes available to other types of businesses. But if cities will include that in their incentive presentation and zone more prime areas for retail, and so to allow for, even when retail is not doing well, to allow for if there's that incentive to reduce some sort of to give them a leeway, to give retailers a leeway in rents and other things, then they will be able to maintain that space for retail and not give it up for other businesses. So, yeah.
Thanks, everyone. So looking at time, I know Kelly has a second question, but I want to get to Dan Jackson since he had not asked a question before. So we'll circle back if we have time to Kelly's second question. So to Dan Jackson's question, both San Rafael and San Anselmo did street closures, which drew foot traffic, primarily to restaurants. Many retailers were closed during those hours, and at least in San Anselmo, some specifically opposed street closures during their operating hours. Any advice for the city or for retailers on how to bridge this gap? Should they do something different? And this is addressed to all three of you again.
You know, I think there's a time and a place for street closures because you can create that walkable environment. You can have retailers and restaurants flow into that street. It doesn't have to even necessarily be permanent, but you also can think of it as the entire street. Maybe you've got multiple blocks, does not need to all be closed. You have a circulation issue you're going to have to address as to how cars can sort of get around that. But sorry, you won't be surprised I'm going to use State Street Santa Barbara again. What did they do? They closed a portion of that street. And it was very controversial, but it created an environment that people got really comfortable, again, being outside and retailers and restaurants spilling into that street area. And then the circulation was addressed so that cars could get around and find places to park, but it also promoted the walkability and the vibrancy of a particular street. So it's something to be considered.
Yeah, and again, it is not, you don't have to force the city to not close streets if it is for public safety or it's not in the interest of the businesses. You don't know why usually the streets are being closed sometimes, or maybe there should be a communique that goes out and says, this is the reason why we're closing before it's closed, so that people are well informed of that. But to add to Ken's point, I think retail depends a lot on foot traffic, and foot traffic is retail pretty much. So if a street is closed, usually people can walk. But then again, if you have other delivery options in your supply chain, so to speak, or in your communication or transactions with customers, then you will be able to leverage those. So that is something that I think retailers should think about and consider.
And just lastly, I mean, I'll jump in. I agree with both what David and Ken said. I just, you know, there's not a one size fits all. I understand where the retailers are coming from. There's a community energy that you get from having street closures, but there's definitely an economic impact. And so it does go down to the details of when, how, et cetera. And if there's a longer term solution, you know, to the point, I think that Ken said of having partial street closures. You know, I know that there's been discussion, do you make it a one way? So you make one street for bikes, for cars and pedestrians all to live harmoniously, and then figure out something that you can look at traffic patterns. So it's not an either or. There's potentially solutions to change. You know, if you looked at the Golden Gate Bridge, right, before they put the barriers, right? It's a flexible traffic pattern. Is there a solution that you can use for some of these areas to look at that same type of, you know, I'm not talking a barrier, but, you know, model, open, closed, partial.
Well, thanks everyone. I'm going to wrap up our Q&A session. Thank you everyone who asked questions. I'll turn things over to Mayor Brian for final remarks.
Yeah, just a few final remarks. I'd like to thank all of our panelists. It's been really great. And I know a lot about zoning, not as much as the director of planning and zoning, but I deal with it often, both in the residential, as you alluded to, and in the commercial. And it's quite a conundrum. But I will say some of the takeaways that I have from, as a small town policymaker, and someone who also sees some of the policymaking at the county level. I think the emphasis on public space and public gathering is something that, you know, cities can really effectuate and make possible. I think earlier on, and you really spoke about the new energy in terms of the consumers. And it's something that, you know, businesses themselves of all types and all manner have to sort of figure out, how do we intersect with consumer, as all of you alluded to it, in a way that they want to. It seems as always there's a bright line between what government can do, really particularly our small town governments. And San Rafael, while it's relatively large, is still a very small city in terms of the levers that we have. It's a very different thing to be managing a mall where you can sort of, you know, figure out what the T&I or the tenant improvements will be, and the mix of businesses relative to the levers that we have. So it's really incumbent upon, I think, our businesses to adapt, but at the same time, we as policymakers can sort of have a vision that provides certainty, so that businesses can plan with a climate that embraces the values that's so important to Marin, such as sustainability and environmentalism, and being, you know, pedestrian and bicycle friendly. So with that, thank you, Shinji, for moderating, and thanks to our panelists. It's been super and informative, and we look forward to connecting with you in the future. Thanks, everybody.
Nice to everybody.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Yeah. Take care.